Welcome. Jumping right into it, a few months back, I did a video about a group called Voice in the Desert. It's a YouTube channel slash group slash sect slash cult, which is precisely what the video was titled. A Voice in the Desert is a Cult. That video, this is their channel, A Voice in the Desert. The video I made right here, A Voice in the Desert is a Cult. This was on the heels of me being contacted by a young woman who was persuaded to quit her job and almost moved to Kenya to be a part of their cultish activity. They focus on the teachings of Jesus, and the heartbeat of their message is that people should not be working. We should forsake all to follow Christ, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. Forsaking all to follow Christ. What does it mean? What does it not mean? Are we to sell all of our possessions? Are we to sell our homes and go live a vagabond lifestyle? Because there seem to be, according to these people, compelling arguments to do so, and not merely that, but compulsory commands from Christ himself, binding on all Christians. All of us should forsake all that we have and follow Christ. Interestingly enough, these same people have state-of-the-art editing software and computers and a YouTube channel. So there already seems to be something of an inconsistency with their idea of forsaking all. But we'll get into that in a moment. Where does this come from? Now, this idea is not exclusive to this group, but it certainly does pertain to this group. No doubt there are others who propagate this erroneous teaching that is cultish. It is cultish. Verse 33 of Luke chapter 14. We're going to be primarily in the book of Luke. This is Jesus speaking. So likewise, whoever of you does not forsake all that he has cannot be my disciple. There you have it. Jesus very clearly says, whoever doesn't forsake all that he has can't be my disciple. So, the conclusion is that we must sell all that we have. All of our possessions, our home, etc., etc. Sell it all, give it all away. Right? This is usually substantiated by this verse here in Luke 18 as well. They'll use this in tandem. The rich young ruler coming to Jesus saying, "What must I do to obtain eternal life?" And Jesus says to him, "You still lack one thing. Sell all that you have and distribute to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven, and come follow me." We'll get back to that in a second. What does Jesus mean here? Likewise, whoever of you, wait a second, stop right there. Likewise. Likewise is a simile. This is a literary device that draws on analogy. Likewise is a comparison. Comparison to what? What immediately preceded it. Let's go there. The old adage goes, any text devoid of its context becomes a pretext. That's exactly what happens when people cherry pick verses like this and establish an entire system or following based around one thing primarily. Beware of anyone who does things like this. Likewise, okay, what is he talking about? Well, let's go to the preceding verses. Right? Most immediately, he's making a comparison. Look at, for which of you, verse 28, intending to build a tower does not sit down and first count the cost, whether he has enough to finish it, lest after he has laid the foundation and is not able to finish, and all who see it begin to mock him, saying, "This man began to build and was not able to finish." Or, what king going to make war against another king does not sit down first and consider whether he is able with 10,000 to meet him who comes against him with 20,000? Or else, while the other is still a great way off, he sends a delegation to asks conditions of peace. So likewise, whoever of you does not forsake all that he has cannot be my disciple. So Jesus is comparing this forsaking of all to counting the cost. What is it going to take for me to do this? I need to count the cost. Am I prepared to follow Christ at any cost? Am I prepared to do whatever I have to do? But gosh, it sure seems like Jesus is commanding us to sell all of our possessions. Well, let's apply that hermeneutic consistently. Namely, to a verse very close to this, Jesus in verse 26, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. Same thing. What is the cost of discipleship? Now, wait a second. Is Jesus commanding hatred of his followers? That's what it says. It says whoever doesn't hate. And then he goes on to list the closest people to us. His father and his mother, right? The Ten Commandments tell us to honor our father and our mother. Jesus says to hate them. His wife and his children, we know elsewhere in the New Testament, husbands are commanded to love their wives as Christ loved the church and their children. Jesus says to hate them. Brothers and sisters, the entire the epistle of 1 John, a test of whether or not you're a genuine Christian is whether or not you love your brothers and sisters, at least in the Lord, for certain. Yes, in his own life also. The same Jesus tells us elsewhere we are to love our enemies. Love your enemies. Do good to those who persecute you and spitefully use you. Pray for them. So there seems to be a glaring inconsistency. If we are to apply a consistent biblical hermeneutic that says the command in verse 33 means we are to literally sell everything we own, our homes and our possessions, and live as vagabonds, then we would also need to take as quite literal and rigid the command to hate our family members. In a word, this is stupid. This is quite frankly a stupid idea. And it is one used by those who are either in a cult or being subjected to cultish thinking. That's what it is. It is biblical illiteracy, if not deliberate deception. Jesus is not commanding hatred. That is not the command. We know that God is love. We know that Jesus so loved the world, that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. We know that for the joy that was set before him, Jesus endured the cross, bearing the shame. We've never seen a greater expression of love than an innocent man hanging on a tree bearing the sins of the world for those who were his enemies. He loved his enemies. In that, what does it say? Not that we love Christ, but that he first loved us, that while we were yet enemies of Christ, he died for the ungodly. This is love. So why would Jesus command us to hate people? That is not what he's commanding. The idea being expressed here is comparative. Our love for Christ should be so great that in comparison to our love for him, our love for others could only be described as hatred. This is in no way a command to hate your mother and father, or your children, or your wife. It is drawing the distinction that there is not another person competing for your love for Jesus. That Jesus is the preeminent figure and object of affection in your life. Everything else is a distant second. Everything and anything, including your wife, your children, your mother, your brothers and sisters, all of those things are such a distant second in comparison to your love for Jesus that they could be described as hatred. In no way is Jesus commanding you to hate them. We know for a fact the overwhelming litany of verses that command exactly the opposite. But when people have an objective or they don't have sense, they will come to erroneous conclusions. This is inconsistently applied. Usually the same people that tell you Jesus commands us to sell everything will not support the idea that you're supposed to hate, but some of them do. In some of these cultish-minded groups, they will say, no, we are commanded to hate our mother and father. Anybody that is listed here, we're supposed to hate them. This is so bafflingly dumb. It's hard to know where to start. But here's where it gets rather inconsistent. Well, we'll get to that in a second. First of all, Jesus tells this rich young ruler, "You still lack one thing. Sell all that you have and distribute to the poor. Then you will have treasure in heaven." Rich young ruler comes to him, "Good master, what must I do to obtain eternal life?" Jesus says, "Why do you call me good? There's only one good, that is in heaven, that is God." And he tells him about all the commands. You know what to do. He says, "I've done all these from my youth." And Jesus says, you still lack one thing. Question, is this command binding on all Christians? Answer, no, unequivocally, no. This is a direct response to a very personal question from a man who says, "Good master, what must I do? What must I do?" And Jesus doesn't immediately respond with verse 22. First, he says, "You know the commands." And he says, "I've done all these." And Jesus says, "You still lack one thing. You do. You go sell all that you have. Give it to the poor and come follow me." You know the rest of the story. He hung his head and walked away sorrowful, for he had many possessions. Jesus, knowing who this man was, his background, was giving a specific command to this specific man based upon his specific question. This is in no way binding on everybody. He said, "You lack one thing. You go do this." Jesus didn't command everybody else to do that. Well, how do we know? Luke chapter 8. Luke chapter 8, they sailed to a country of the Gadarenes, which is opposite Galilee. Big story here. Jesus is casting out demons from a man who lived in the tombs, was bound by chains, would break the chains. Many demons were in him. And Jesus asked him, saying, "What is your name?" And he said, "Legion," because many demons had entered him. So Jesus commands the demons out of him. They enter a herd of swine. They run violently down, and they're drowned in the lake. All right, pretty popular story of Jesus healing this demon-possessed man. So all of the people come out to see what happened. They came to Jesus, and they found the man from whom the demons had departed. Verse 35 of Luke 8. Sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind. And they were afraid. They also, who had seen it, told them by what means he who had been demon-possessed was healed. And the whole multitude of the surrounding region of the Gadarenes asked him to depart from them, for they were seized with great fear. And he got into the boat and returned. Now, listen. Verse 38. The man from whom the demons had departed begged Jesus, that he might be with him. And Jesus sent him away, saying, "Return to your own house and tell what great things God has done for you." And he went his way and proclaimed throughout the whole city the great things Jesus had done for him. Wait a second. I thought the command of Christ was that everybody sell all that they have and follow him. Jesus called 12 people to follow him. He called 12 disciples specifically. Matthew left the tax booth. All right, Peter and Andrew left their fishing boats. And James and John. These people left their specific trades to follow Jesus. They were specifically commanded for specific tasks. Not everyone, but 12 individual people. One man, a rich young ruler, comes to him and says, "What must I do?" And Jesus says, "You go sell all of your possessions, give to the poor, and come follow me." Yet, in Luke chapter 8, we have a man begging Jesus, begging him to be with him. He wants to follow him. And Jesus says, no. He sent him away. Go to your own house. Go back home. Go back home to your... He doesn't say sell your house. He says go back to your house. Go back to your house with your family and proclaim the great things God has done for you. Jesus does not call everyone to do the same thing. a command for you may not be a command for somebody else. Now, certain things are binding on all of us, but this command to sell your possessions is not one of them. And the proof is here in Luke chapter 8. Jesus is begged by this man, and he says, no, go back to your own house and proclaim what God. He doesn't let him. He doesn't let him leave what he had. He doesn't let him come follow him. Does it mean the man wasn't a follower of Christ? Of course not. It means that he wasn't called to do the same thing that Peter was called to do. They're two different people. He wasn't called to do the same thing the rich young ruler was called to do. When Jesus was dealing with a rich young ruler, he was dealing with a man who had a specific set of affections and desires, and Jesus was flushing those things out. That was not the problem with this man. This man was just healed. Jesus says, return to your own home, and doesn't allow him to follow him. Let's move on. Luke chapter 9. Now, if we are to take the command of Jesus seriously in Luke 14 that says, whoever does not forsake all that he has cannot be my disciple, we need to apply it consistently. Luke chapter 9, verse 23. And he said to them all, if anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. For whoever desires to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will save it. Question: is Jesus commanding suicide for Christians here? That's what it sounds like. He says, if anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily. Take up his cross. A cross was an implement of death. That's what it was. There's no other way to view it. A cross was a means of capital punishment at the time. Take up your own cross daily and follow me. And then he says to lose your life. Jesus is not commanding suicide, but asinine biblical hermeneutics would lead you to believe so, yet they won't apply this consistently. What is Jesus saying here? This is metaphorical. There is an application. The application is this. You are to figuratively take up your cross daily and follow him. And figuratively lose your life for his sake. And figuratively forsake all that you have for the sake of Christ. However, you should be willing to literally do it as well. Should the call come, you should be willing to literally take up a cross and die on behalf of Jesus. Should the call come, you should be willing to literally lose your life for his sake. But this is by no means a compulsory command for people to go commit suicide. Go take up a cross and die on it. It's insane. And in the same way, it is by no means a compulsory command for people to forsake all that they have and go sell their homes and their possessions, give it to the poor, and live a vagabond lifestyle. Now, if Christ calls you to do it, you should be willing to. There should not be a single possession that means more to you than the love of Christ. You should be willing at a moment's notice to give it up, to give up anything. Nothing should have your affections. Nothing should have the affection of your heart more than Christ. Not even your wife, not your husband, not your children, not anybody. But you're not commanded to hate them. You are commanded to love them. You're commanded to love Christ so much more with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength that a comparison might be likened to hatred. And Jesus is not commanding people to commit suicide here. It's stupid. He is saying you should be willing to, and in a figurative sense, forsake all. Nothing should be tying you down. There should be nothing that means more to you than Jesus. And if need be, literally be ready to take that call. If need be. Let's move on. One of the arguments that I've seen from these people in other interactions and even in a couple of brief ones that I've had, the notion that Paul was a tent maker has come up. And they'll say things like, yes, but when Paul was initially making tents, it was before he was, truly knowledgeable about Christ. Or that when he was initially making tents, I've even heard him say he was disobeying God, but he later quit making tents, right? That it was early on in his conversion that he was still working, right? Because their whole premise is money is evil, right? Well, the Bible doesn't say that money itself is evil. It says that the love of money is a root of all evil, or a root of all kinds of evil. The love of it. Right? Money is a thing, right? Love of anything can be idolatry. But money itself is morally neutral. There's nothing inherently evil about a piece of silver or a piece of gold. It's the desire for it that is evil. It's the coveting of that becomes evil. Anyway, they say Paul was disobeying God, or it was early on in his ministry. He stopped making tents at a certain point and obeyed the command of Jesus to stop working and to stop making money. Again, either the product of biblical illiteracy or deliberate deception. Acts chapter 18. After these things, Paul departed from Athens and went to Corinth. And he found a certain Jew named Aquila, born in Pontus, who had recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had commanded all the Jews to depart from Rome. And he came to them. So because he was of the same trade, he stayed with them and worked, for by occupation they were tent makers. Immediately after this, it says, and he reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath and persuaded both Jews and Greeks. So yes, while Paul was doing ministry and evangelism, he's working. By trade, he was a tent maker. Question, Acts chapter 18, is this early in Paul's ministry? Paul was converted in Acts chapter 9. Now, for a timeline of the events, Acts chapter 9 took place roughly in 34 AD, shortly after the resurrection of Christ. That's Acts chapter 9. Acts chapter 18, though only 9 chapters away in the book of Acts, is 17 years later. On or about the time of 51 AD is when Paul went to Corinth. 17 years after his conversion, and Paul is still working with his own hands, still making tents and preaching the gospel. So, was Paul misinformed this whole time? Was he disobeying Christ for 17 years working? Why is there no mention from Paul that people should stop working? Why is he not only not working himself, but not imploring Priscilla and Aquila to quit their jobs as tent makers because it's evil? Money's evil, and Jesus commanded us all to forsake everything that we have and to sell all our possessions and live homeless, vagabond lifestyles. Why isn't he doing that? Because it was a wrong assertion to begin with. The people that purport Jesus commanded it are wrong, demonstrably wrong. 17 years after his conversion in 51 AD, Paul is still making tents. Paul is still making tents. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but here's another example. Matthew chapter 8. When Jesus had entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him, pleading with him, saying, Lord, my servant is lying at home, paralyzed, dreadfully tormented. And Jesus said to him, I will come and heal him. The centurion answered and said, Lord, I am not worthy that you should come under my roof, but only speak a word, and my servant will be healed. For I also am a man under authority, having soldiers under me. And I say to this one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes, and to my servant, do, and he does it. When Jesus heard it, he marveled and said to those who followed, assuredly, I say to you, I have not found such great faith, not even in Israel. And I say to you that many will come from the east and the west to sit down with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the sons of the kingdom will be cast into outer darkness. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then Jesus said to the centurion, go your way, And as you have believed, so let it be done for you. And his servant was healed that same hour. Several things to note. Number one, Jesus told him, like he did the demon-healed man in Luke 8, go your way, go back. Go back to where you came from. The centurion, this is a job. This is an occupation. A centurion was paid to do that job. Jesus didn't tell him, you need to stop doing that. You need to go back and sell your house and then come follow me. Why? Because everybody is not called to do the same thing. He sends him back to his own house, back to his own job, makes no mention of occupation, makes no mention of money, makes no mention of his house. He says, go back your own way. He applauds the man's faith as a Gentile. He applauds the man's faith in comparison to all of those in Israel, and sends him his way and says, so let it be done for you. Now, if it was imperative that this man quit his job and sell his home, why would Jesus leave him like that? Why would he leave him to his own destruction? He wouldn't. The people that propagate this are liars, and they're insane. This is cultish thinking. Acts chapter, where is it? Acts chapter 10. You have Peter lodging with a man named Simon. Simon was a tanner. Nowhere in there does it say that Peter implored him to stop being a tanner. Shortly thereafter, Peter is summoned from Simon the tanner's house to go to a man named Cornelius, another centurion, again, a job. He preaches the gospel to him and his household. They're all baptized. They all become believers. Nowhere in there does Peter say, sell your home and quit your job as a centurion. Nowhere. It's not even mentioned. Not even once. Why? Because that is nowhere commanded for all Christians. It's not. This is just a couple examples of people working in the New Testament. Moreover, we have commands. 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, Paul says to those in Thessalonica, nor did we eat anyone's bread free of charge, but worked with labor and toil night and day, that we might not be a burden to any of you, not because we don't have authority, but to make ourselves an example of how you should follow us. For even when we were with you, we commanded this, that if anyone will not work, neither shall he eat. For we hear there are some who walk among you in a disorderly manner, not working at all, but are busybodies. Now those who are such we command and exhort through our Lord Jesus Christ, that they work in quietness and eat their own bread. Commands to work, commands to work. All through the Bible. Go back to the book of Ecclesiastes. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. Work. Enjoy the fruit of your labor. To not work is to be a busybody. Now, if you're in some lewd occupation, right? If somebody was saved and was, formerly an exotic dancer, then absolutely quit that occupation and find another one. Find an honest means of work. But anyone who tells you that you are commanded to sell everything and to live as a vagabond is a liar. They're a deceptive liar. Jesus by no means made that compulsory across the board. You'll hear people reference, for example, in the book of Acts, that people sold their possessions. They sold lands and homes, and they brought the proceeds and laid them at the apostles' feet. Many of them did that, but they were by no means required to do so. Recall Ananias and Sapphira. They sold a certain portion of land, and they withheld part of the sum, part of the proceeds, and they lied about it. And they brought a certain amount of to Peter, saying that it was the full amount. And he says, why has Satan filled your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit? You have not lied to men, but to God. And they were both killed. They were both killed by God, mind you. They lied to the Holy Spirit. What does Peter say to them, though? While it was still yours, was it not yours to do what you wanted? Was it not yours to do whatever you wished? That's what he tells them. It was your land to do whatever you wished. They were under zero obligation to sell that land. They were under zero obligation to give it to anybody else. However, if you want to, you're free to do whatever you want with it. I am not dissuading people from selling anything and giving to the poor. Of course it's noble to help those in need. By all means, do so. Right? John Wesley had a philosophy: work all that you can, make as much money as you can, and give away as much as you can. Great. What I'm saying is this: anyone who tells you are commanded to sell your home and to sell all of your possessions and give it to someone to come live in their commune is a liar and is evil. These same hypocritical liars will take their newfound vagabond commune submissives and send them out on missions to go beg for money. Why? Well, because they have to eat. They have to figure something out. So they send them on these missions to go panhandle in parking lots. They don't mind using the money. They just want you to work for it. They want you to do the labor for them, but they'll happily receive it from you. Again, the same hypocrites right here, right? Voice in the desert, have this substantial YouTube channel with nearly 200 videos on it, with detailed animations, right? The animation software used to produce the videos they're producing is not free, nor is it cheap. So they have computer technology, they have animation software, they have some commune to live in, but they want you to sell your possessions and bring it to them and come live with us in Kenya. These are the same people that were convincing others to sell their kidneys. By all means, please go and watch the video that I made here. A Voice in the Desert is a cult, and so is anyone who tells you anything even mildly similar to what they're saying. The love of money is evil. So is the love of sex, or the love of an occupation, or the love of music, or the love of anything. Anything that you love more than Christ is an idol and is evil. And certainly money is up there. More people tend to love it. But let me tell you this. I have known and do know people who don't have money and still love it. You can love it and not have it. And likewise, you can have it and not love it. The idea being driven home by Jesus here, whoever does not forsake all that he has, cannot be my disciple, is this. When you come to Christ, you are no longer a proprietor, but a steward. That's the whole idea. You stop acting as a proprietor of your own goods and you start acting as a steward of God's goods. You take what he has given you and you steward them well. You steward them. They are no longer yours. They are his. They were always his to begin with. But your perception has changed. Now you look at all of your possessions as a stewardship. A stewardship. None of these things are mine. Anything I have is a gift. And should the call come, should there be any reason that any of these things, Jesus said, if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off. Better for you to enter hell with one hand than to enter heaven with one hand than to enter hell with your whole body intact. Whatever it is, deal radically with the sin. But you can have nothing and still love it. You can love the things you don't have. Most of the American lottery system, the Powerball system, is funded by people living on or about the poverty line. But there are people that desperately want what they don't have. So, likewise, there are people that have funds upon funds that don't care. They could lose it in a moment, and it wouldn't mean anything to them. Why? Because their affections are for Christ, and they see all that they have as a stewardship. When you follow Christ, you stop being a proprietor and become a steward. That's the idea. You don't hate your mother and father and brother and sister, you love Christ even more. If there is a command or a call to sell things, by all means sell them. But if anyone tells you that Jesus has commanded you in compulsory fashion to sell all that you have and be a vagabond, they are a liar. We are commanded to work. We have seen several examples of trades and occupations that were never objected to by Jesus nor the apostles. 17 years into the ministry and after the conversion of Paul, he is still working with his own hands, making tents while he is doing ministry and preaching the gospel. Love Christ with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. Steward well what he has given you. Whatever you do, in word or in deed, do all in the name of Christ and for his glory. God bless.